Welcome back. Today I've uncovered some of Joe Lonsdale's 79 posts on Quora related to Palantir. We're going to dive into all of his secrets and his topics along the way, including Palantir, of course, the company, how they built such a strong brand, why Joe Lonsdale himself would leave Palantir as a co-founder, how Alex Karp got chosen as Palantir's CEO, how profitable Palantir truly is, what it would take for the company to be bought out, Peter Thiel's impact on the company, dealing with FUD, the ethics of the business, and much more, including one mention of the valuation of Palantir into the future. So I've been very excited about this video. All of these posts contain a lot of insight in terms of what matters most to the Palantir story, especially from a co-founder. On early thoughts, we're diving back to the past to explore these. This video is brought to you one more time by Masterworks. More about them at the end of the video. So here we are at the beginning, this first question being, what are some companies similar to Palantir Technologies in terms of challenge and work culture? So I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but this was updated on November 12th, 2020. Joe says, Palantir is very unique. There aren't many companies which combine one of the very top technology cultures, best engineers with the ability to work on what are truly some of the hardest problems. I consider Palantir to be the first and most successful smart enterprise company in a wave of technology companies that are just emerging. Enterprise used to make me think boring. That's probably because the first wave of enterprise software companies were about solving linear problems. They added a lot of value at the time, but they aren't always the most conceptually interesting pieces of software. Smart enterprise is the fourth and newest wave in this series, and I think it will be responsible for a huge amount of value creation over the coming 10 to 20 years. Smart enterprise is non-linear. It's about enabling knowledge workers to process and analyze massive amounts of heterogeneous data to collaborate and monitor things. It's about creating conceptual access to information to allow people to solve hard problems, collaborate better, fill in the gaps and inefficiencies, and much more. Smart enterprise is related to the topic of man-machine symbiosis, and it enables it, which we talk a lot about, and it enables it. There are a lot of awesome companies to work for in Silicon Valley that I would recommend, and Palantir is right around the top of the list and is still doing amazing things and growing fast. But to answer the question, when it comes to companies like Palantir, I would consider it related to a few other smart enterprise companies with awesome tech cultures. And then he goes on to list a few: Adapar, OpenGov, RelateIQ, and he is a founder and or investor in all four of those. How did Palantir build such a strong brand? Palantir's brand emerged as a consequence of the people on its team, how it operates, and its core mission. The brand wasn't something we worked on. In fact, there's probably still very little expertise in branding at all within Palantir. This is back in 2012. It's a reflection of the company itself. We were lucky to start with some of the most talented engineers in Silicon Valley, and we're really proud of what we were working towards and spending a lot of time convincing other talented people to join. When we found somebody truly great early on, even if it wasn't 100% clear what his or her role would be, we'd find a place for them. Palantir was able to keep the bar immensely high in terms of required talent and in terms of people you'd want to work with. Why did Joe Lonsdale leave Palantir? He left the full-time role in 2009 because he said, I had successfully replaced myself in both parts of the company we created and fully vested. I'm really proud that the Palantir founders are still close friends and allies, and we all still help Palantir in our own ways. I'm still an advisor and a major shareholder at Palantir. I don't think Palantir would have succeeded if any of Steven, Nathan, Karp, or Peter hadn't been there during the first 3 to 4 years. Karp is awesome and is a very close friend and important mentor to me and is one of the wisest men you'll ever encounter. I know he believes the same thing about the founders. This is something that people don't realize about great companies. It's often a team of people who each could have built something smaller themselves, working together, who make it work. That's how you get a company that truly transforms the world. Not to mention that the next set of people who joined Palantir, many of them my close friends who are still running the company, chose to join us instead of building a company themselves. They were just as critical. We're lucky to attract so much talent. I'm really proud of the team we built at Palantir and what it's doing for the world in so many areas. I'm especially proud that the founders remain trusted friends throughout the decade since we put it together. How did Karp get chosen as CEO? This is very exciting, something I want to learn more about. Karp was helping us meet people for Clarium, so I got to know him well. He started to advise us a lot on Palantir, and his wisdom was really key early on. As his contacts he'd made from being the top philosophy student, he and Peter Thiel had known each other from Stanford Law School, and he was working on charitable causes with various high net worth European individuals, many of whom apparently think top philosophy students are cool. He began introducing some of them and their friends to Peter at Clarium as investors for the fund, and it turned out a lot of these individuals also had relevant connections and knowledge about various global intelligence and defense institutions, that Steven and I were trying to understand for Palantir in the early days. Peter wanted us to have a CEO who wasn't 21, or maybe who wasn't the 21-year-old version of Steven or me. And we kept meeting and rejecting leaders from the DC defense world. We insisted that they didn't get our culture. So they flew out to the UK with an excuse that it was to see Clarium investors, but really it was because Karp was there. We went on late walks and discussed it, and I sold him. He'd never been a CEO, but it was clear we needed him. When we told Peter later, he was shocked and then asked if Karp was really willing to do it. Peter agreed it was a great idea. I'm not sure if he was more shocked that I'd agreed to hire somebody senior to me or that Dr. Karp was willing to be a CEO. Alex had continued to learn and had been a really important mentor and friend to me and to many who are still at Palantir, even though we don't see eye to eye on every point of strategy. He is the best CEO I've ever worked with. In 2014, on profitability, Joe Lonsdale says, the question that matters most here is the internal entrepreneurial DNA that will turn these impressive extensions and initial successes into product and platform companies. Palantir is doing very well, but if it's able to build platform businesses with a future in mind, it'll be $100 billion plus dollar company. That's what I'd ask the senior people here and at similar companies. Companies that size focused on huge contracts tend to drive out entrepreneurial personalities in the middle ranks, as those personalities are very threatening to everyone else. What are you doing to nurture them and help them own and express their ideas within these new areas? What would it take for Palantir to accept a buyout from Oracle? Joe Lonsdale says probably to begin with, this would require dedication from Oracle to transform itself and build a top-tier software culture that truly believes in solving hard problems and trying to make the world a better place through innovation versus an obsession with margins and the numbers and a hardcore big D swinging Oracle sales team that kills what it eats and lives or dies by the quarter. They are both businesses and they both have aspects to being a business. And it's amazing what Oracle has achieved. It is a much bigger business and Palantir could probably learn a lot from Oracle. But as far as I can tell, they are very different cultures and attract different people. The quality of software engineers at Palantir seem to be much higher, and I don't see them being happy working with the other culture, nor do I see Oracle putting up with some of the business philosophy of Palantir's execs. When asked if we can call Palantir an analytics company, Joe Lonsdale says, I think you would not be entirely wrong, and we need simple labels to go about our daily business as investors and journalists or whatnot. However, big companies do not pay for analytics. They pay for solving their important information-related problems that impact the core processes of their business. They especially pay a lot if this necessitates fixing or improving aspects of their core IT infrastructure in ways that could have cost them hundreds of millions of dollars more and a lot more time and mess otherwise. It might not have even worked out as well after all of that if they'd attempted it themselves. This is huge, and this is my most important and most liked quote from Joe Lonsdale. Speaking on Peter Thiel's involvement in the company, Joe Lonsdale says Peter Thiel is only one of the co-founders and has no operational role in the company. He does not himself make most decisions for Palantir. A very key clarification. And another note on Peter Thiel. Very early on, Peter saved Palantir from a partnership that would have otherwise destroyed the company. In practice, that skepticism has led us to force others to pay upfront as one of the ways of providing value, which has worked very well. Ultimately, our own execution can make us win. What does Joe Lonsdale think of the BuzzFeed Inside Palantir article? More so talking about FUD. From my perspective, it's very easy to take a few select facts out of context and paint a negative story, which is what happened here. I don't want to get into all of this because I'll leave the link in the description, but this is the part I really wanted to show. Going forward, I hope Palantir uses this as an excuse to show off more of the positive, as the company really has nothing to hide. It understandably just doesn't want to be part of the media circus or to have its large customers, who are often privately working with them on critical projects, forced into the limelight. I think a similar instinct makes people want to keep a company private versus public, to keep building and growing fast without having to be harassed by outsiders who don't understand what they're doing and aren't likely to congratulate them for being so awesome, so much as find ways to nitpick, which is always easy to do when a company is doing so much. It's a tough trade-off to know what is right. Most leaders tell me they are happy they went public when they did, and I'm curious to see what makes sense for Palantir later. It will be the equivalent of raising salaries another 30+% if it's done right when it's time. And very last question, did Palantir's founders consider the implications ethically of their work? Do they have thoughts about the consequences of what they built? Palantir was created to protect the realm with a warning built into its name. Hundreds of the US and allied armed forces have thanked me in person for the Palantir system for reasons such as saving lives against IEDs and other threats, or helping them root out terrorists before they could strike again, and receive thanks in return for their service. Others have interrupted talks and protested, or in rare cases even threatened my other activities. What's the story? I'm a proud founder of Palantir. The company wouldn't exist if it weren't for me, something which is also true for at least a handful of other people. But I haven't been in charge of the company for about a decade, and no longer speak for the board or the leaders, although I remain a shareholder and advisor. Early on, years before it became popular in the 2010s, Palantir reached out to experts across the board, building a civil liberties group to help governments and companies become experts on how to protect data and make sure they were using and protecting it lawfully. We sought to balance privacy with other concerns to predict and prevent the sort of issues that are now troubling consumer technology companies that didn't take these early precautions. The amazing technologies created by the mission-driven group of technologists at Palantir over the years is why more than half of its revenues today are tied to its commercial success, where our systems solve some of the hardest problems and enable critical workflows in major corporations around the world. Creating Palantir was a patriotic work of the best and brightest, and it succeeded. But even more than audit trails and transparent policies and a civil liberties group, we went a step further and agreed to name the company with a warning from its fictional counterpart. The name signifies that even after we are gone, it will be up to our posterity to make sure Palantir is not used for evil. One can only hope that as China's technology gets more powerful, forces for accountability, transparency of government action, and liberty will win out in both countries. Palantir has done immeasurable good for America and our allies' defense, saving huge number of lives and tens of billions of dollars compared to legacy systems. In talking about Palantir's less popular work, Lonsdale says, if Palantir refused to work with the US government, ICE wouldn't go away, and our country would have to spend far more money on another system that was less effective at doing its job, which would also mean that a system that was less effective at watching the watchers, less effective in enforcing data policies, as the alternative does not have advanced civil liberties infrastructure built over the years to protect our citizens and our privacy. Palantir has an extraordinary history of confronting the ethical issues in its sector from its very founding, proactively doing extra work to inculcate appropriate moral values and build infrastructure that protects civil liberties and enforces policy. In other words, grappling with and investing in these decisions in profound ways. Frankly, Palantir is awesome. It's a national treasure, a rare Silicon Valley company with a top tech culture of the kind that doesn't exist in our legacy industries, but that was created as a mission-driven company to serve America. After reading this, I hope it shares with you the same insights that I was able to gain from hearing Lonsdale talk about this company early on, what his impact was in the business and what he thinks about it today, and how successful its path to becoming public truly was and how misunderstood it still is. I will leave all of these links in the description, and leave a like if you appreciate my work pulling out all of the most important details. And now I want to share with you one more message from Masterworks. During a time period of high inflation, uncertain monetary policy, overpriced real estate, and quickly falling stock prices, it's more important than ever to consider diversifying across asset classes. Did you know that contemporary art is one of the oldest assets in the world, and prices outpaced the S&P 500 total return by 164% from 1995 to 2021? According to S&P Global, 94% of fund managers couldn't beat their respective S&P indices. So how does the average investor have a chance to get better than average returns? The world of alternative assets. One of the alternative investments that I'm very excited about and that most investors are overlooking is blue chip art. Contemporary art has not been accessible beyond the global elites. Until now, I'm excited to share with our community and give you priority access to our sponsor, Masterworks. Masterworks uses over 60,000 data points to find financially attractive works of art, and then lets you invest in shares representing an investment in that painting. Just click on the Masterworks link in the video description to get started.